Welcome everyone, it's the Crypto Lark and I'm joined today by Naomi Brockwell. How's it going?
It's gone pretty well over here.
We got so much to talk about and there's been so much happening in the news recently. And one of the things that we've been seeing a real trend towards is more and more kind of institutional players starting to get into crypto. I mean, we had E-Trade, who was rumored to be doing something. We had Ameritrade last week, who was kind of caught with, experimenting with paper trading for Bitcoin and Litecoin and all this stuff. And we have Bakkt, and then we have Fidelity, and on and on and on and on it goes. Futures contracts. I mean, there was a day when the CME did more in volume in futures contracts than the biggest spot price exchange, which was Binance, did on the day by about $100 million. So my question to you is, do you think that Bitcoin is very quickly becoming too institutionalized?
I think that's a great question. I think you have to, what does institutionalized mean? Does that create barriers to other usage? There are a lot of things that come along with something becoming more institutionalized. And I think that a lot of people had their eyes on traditional finance. Some people were thinking, oh, this is going to be great because this will bring more liquidity in. This will bring a lot of money. This is going to be what makes it go to the moon. And that was kind of half the people. And then the other half was saying, like, this has nothing to do with traditional finance. This was created to get away from traditional finance. We don't want what happened there to happen in crypto. Let's try and stay away from this. And there are pros and cons to traditional finance getting involved. What's happening in America is lobbyists really rule everything, right? And they have a lot of control over what happens in terms of regulation. And so if you have people who are crypto friendly fighting on crypto's behalf, that could possibly be a good thing because politicians don't really like crypto. There's no reason for them to. Either the banks, it's a threat to them, or they're involved with it. If they're involved, they're more likely to try to, find things that are crypto friendly. But then you have the regulatory capture side of things where the big financial institutions try to implement rules that create barriers to entry for the smaller companies. That's what I'm most afraid of. I'm most afraid of the regulatory capture that happens when you have something like Fidelity coming in or JP Morgan coming in and saying, hey, government, we need these rules. We need, to institute third-party rules where, normal people can't have custody of their assets. You need these third parties like us to hold it to protect people because we're licensed, we're regulated, that big R word, that magic word, regulated, and that means
we have to protect
everyone.
Unsophisticated investors.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm most worried about. And I think that's a huge threat to crypto, actually. And I don't see it as a plus at all. So although there may be some good things on the periphery, if there are players trying to make the world a more crypto-friendly place, that could be good. But I'm not sure that it's going to be to the advantage of all the players. I think it's just going to be to the big institutions who can afford the compliance costs, who can, afford to hire 1 trillion lawyers to navigate this crazy complex regulatory environment. So, at the end of the day, I think that crypto is created in such a way that it can circumvent a lot of this stuff. So crypto will always be useful in that way. It can't be censored, it can't be controlled, but the government can do a real good job at trying. So we'll always have the option, but I do worry that we're looking at the world kind of evolving where it's just going to be really gummed up and it's not going to be this mainstream freedom tool that we probably want it to be. I think that people like fringe cases will use that. They'll probably use privacy coins and things for that, or privacy second layer functions on top of Bitcoin, things like that. And that's really where we're at. We're going to have this very institutionalized sector using cryptocurrency, and that's obviously the future. Obviously, money and security, everything is going to become digital, and they're going to be using blockchain tech to do it. But then I think that there is definitely a space for continued fringe use, but that may be all people use it for. That may be the only demographic that uses it. People who are concerned about freedom, who are concerned about freedom of speech, who have financial autonomy, financial privacy. Unfortunately, that's not a large amount of the population across the
No,
world.
no, it really
You
isn't. A
know?
lot of people don't care about that. I mean, look at how many people willingly give away everything on Facebook, and you realize people aren't that concerned about privacy when it
And we're
comes down
talking
to it.
about Facebook, but let's talk about the people who willingly give away all of their data by using credit cards for
Yeah,
everything, who don't use
absolutely.
cash purchases. I mean,
Hmm.
the banks, that's where they make a huge amount of their money, by selling
That's
your
right.
data and saying, well, we know exactly where she buys everything. Naomi goes to, this cafe every morning and buys avocado
Oh,
toast. Like,
oh,
they have
they're
so much
slaying us,
information.
aren't they? These banks. I mean, just think about it. Not only are they selling our data and selling all this information about us, but they're also charging crazy amounts of interest on the credit cards and the
Yeah.
mortgages, and then they steal everything from you and
Yeah.
commit all this, and that's not enough. They have to then go and commit a whole giant pile of crime on top of that. You know,
Absolutely.
doing
But
money
then
laundering for Al Qaeda and stuff like this, and wow,
But
the
then you've also
crazy
got the
stuff.
Fed, like just coming into cahoots with them as well, that are creating all this stuff on top of it. So the Fed's setting interest rates so low. So there's not even a perk of really keeping your money in a bank account, because it's not like you're earning
Mm-mm,
interest on it
mm-mm.
anymore, because the interest rates are just set so low. So, like I just don't see the benefit of going through that system at the moment. Like when you're talking about online purchases, yeah, it made sense to use a credit card. But now if you have cryptocurrency, that may be a better option for people, so your data isn't tracked.
Yeah. When I can, I do, without a doubt. And, unfortunately, not enough places accept it yet, but it's
Right.
important to support the people who do. I really believe in that. If you have a local business or even an online business that you're friendly with or you use on a semi-regular basis, whatever it might be, pay in crypto if you can. And I
Yeah,
know for a lot of people that's a hard thing because the pizza problem and all this stuff. Like,
of course.
guys, you
Yeah.
can't be afraid to, spend a couple bucks once in a while. I want to come back a little bit to this institutional idea. And I actually was thinking while you were talking, it's almost a bit of a Trojan horse inviting all these institutions in. This is something I've always thought about
Mm.
Wall Street in general, is that they are not our friends.
No.
Nothing they do is friendly towards anyone who is not them, and even then they hate each other and always are trying to cloak and dagger each other all the time.
Right.
And I think you brought up a really good point about, whether it's going to be Fidelity or someone else, but them actually kind of starting to push towards this regulatory conformity. Well, Bitcoin's only for sophisticated, accredited investors. And so all
Exactly.
exchanges now have to enforce this accredited investor thing. And that would cut out players like Coinbase, which have spent a lot of time and energy bringing crypto to the masses. Whereas Fidelity, they're all about their big clients, right? And you look at the other guys, Back's not going to be for regular people. Now, look, Ameritrade and E-Trade, they are for a wider audience. So seeing those guys get in, I'm less worried about, because I look at those more as kind of just marketplaces. And it's just another form of an exchange in the same way we saw like Robinhood come in. You can trade stocks or you can trade Bitcoin and Ethereum or Litecoin, whatever it's going to be. But you do have to take these big players with a big grain of salt because they're not our friends. That's what it
Yeah,
comes down to.
absolutely. You got to think of them the same way that you think about a lot of these government players coming in. Like they're not our friends. You have vested interests that are protecting their position right now. This is not people coming in to save the day and bringing in more liquidity and helping us go to the moon. There may be some on the periphery, as I mentioned, some positive externalities of this happening, but I would bet that the negative externalities are going to far outweigh those. So I think we should be very careful. And luckily, there are just some really smart people in the space who are constantly improving on the tech and creating more tools to give people financial autonomy and privacy. And as long as you said, we're supporting the people who are doing this and creating market signals saying, yes, we do want these things, I think that's really great. And I know we're going to be talking later on about Binance launching their DEX. I think things like that are really exciting, having more
Mm-hmm.
decentralized exchanges where people do have more of that freedom. I think that's a very exciting direction to be going in. And as long as people constantly innovating in that way, then we'll probably stay a few steps ahead, but it'll only ever be a few.
That's right. And it's a constant
Quick to
game.
catch up. Yeah. Yeah, it's not like we can just rest on our laurels and say, yes, we achieved the freedom. We are done. Yeah, it's not really how it works.
Now, I remember reading something from Fluffy Pony one time, and he said that basically, and this could apply to the same thing we were just saying, is that privacy is a never-ending game. You're only ever able to stay a couple of steps ahead because the other guys are always working to get ahead of you. And it was kind of a paraphrase, but that's the general idea, and it's so true. Now, we mentioned regulations. I think this is a good moment to sort of move into that, and we'll end up talking about Tether a bit maybe on the back end of this too. But the regulations we're seeing right now, it's one of these again. I feel so much of what we just said with that institutional conversation really comes into the regulation conversation. Is that are regulations a good thing or a bad thing? We see India right now, for example. There's some rumors which I would suspect are likely to be true rumors, considering how in the past the key financial organizations in India have been very anti-crypto. Particularly the decentralized ones, right? There's been talk of the
Mhm.
digital rupee, which of course would be a centralized coin that they control the emission of and accounts of and all that fun stuff, right? But that's almost not interesting to me at all versus something like Bitcoin, which they can't control and thus is a threat to their power as institutions. So we see India discussing a potential ban, which would be
Yeah.
dramatic on the same level that it was dramatic for China. Maybe not quite as dramatic because the Indian market is not quite as big, but still it would be bad when it comes down. And then we
Mhm.
see other countries like Finland, who just passed some new regulations, and their regulations were kind of the same as what France did. And they basically said that, hey, we really want crypto businesses to come here. You want to launch your ICO in France? Awesome. We're going to give you a special visa for your crypto company. Or you want to have an exchange here in France? Great. All you have to do is register with us, and we're going to ensure that you have access to the banking infrastructure as part of that deal. So, I mean, that feels like really positive regulation. So, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, regulation and compliance are these kind of dirty words in my mind, but at the same time, like that kind of regulation doesn't seem bad.
Well, I mean, when you say like, well, that's positive regulation, it's like, yeah, because they're giving you the permission to do the things that you should already be able to do. Like, it's amazing how happy we get when it's like, oh my God, the government did a reasonable thing. This is fantastic. What great regulation. And it's
It's
like,
just so
well,
rare.
it's amazing how we've just normalized a situation where nothing is allowed unless we've been given explicit permission.
Hmm.
The idea that when Jay Clayton was saying, well, how do we know what's a security and what's not? You guys won't give us clear guidance. And his response was, you should just presume that everything is a security if you're not sure. And it's like, well, of course, every government body wants to think like that. They all want to say, just presume that you're in our jurisdiction if you're unsure. It's just kind of this crazy situation we're in. But as you said, I mean, there are definitely places around the world that are more crypto friendly, and they're recognizing that if they open their doors, then this is a giant industry that really it's burgeoning at the moment. We're just seeing it start to blossom and starting to see the potential of this industry, the incredible number of jobs that have been created, the incredible amount of wealth that's been created. It's quite incredible. So I really like the idea of different countries recognizing that and not self-sabotaging, which I see places like New York doing, where they
Oh, it's crazy.
institute the bit license, everyone leaves because it's just not good for crypto businesses. It's terrible. How many have they issued now? Like 18-bit licenses over 5-6 years. Like it's incredible how few businesses are in New York. Whereas on the other side of things, you've got Bermuda and Malta and Gibraltar, and you said that Finland's looking at some interesting things, and France is doing some interesting things. I mean, I think that America really, if they're worried about losing their stronghold in the global economy as being like, numero uno, then I think that they're going about it the wrong way. They're going about it by saying, well, we're going to stop it and kill it because crypto might kill us. And so let's just stop it in its tracks, instead of saying this is this inevitable thing everyone's going to be going on. And unless we open the doors, other people are going to open the doors. So they're really just letting other people come in and take that mantle right now.
And it's interesting too, of course, because the United States is this big regulatory mess where you have one guy who's trying to say what everyone should do, and then you have 50 different guys who are the states in that
Right.
situation all saying, no, we're going to do something kind of different sometimes. And so
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
seen that happen in the US, where New York has been quite draconian in its approach. And then we have like Wyoming, which is saying like, kick the doors wide open. Let's get all the crypto businesses in here. We're going to do everything we can to invite those businesses in. And there's some others that are kind of following suit. I know Colorado either has passed or is in the process of looking at some very crypto kind of friendly regulations. So, those are positive things. I guess we'll see what comes out of that. But I definitely agree with that. Unless the US kind of really, make some effort to continue to be that leader, technology wise, we are going to see these businesses simply go to France and stay in France, go to Malta and stay in Malta, go to Russia and stay in Russia.
Absolutely.
Russia's doing a lot in terms of regulation as well. And they, of course, in terms of Eastern Europe, they have a massive developer scene over there that will be inviting in these projects. And especially if they can get, again, regulatory approval. And it's so funny. It's like you say, it's why do we have to ask permission for these things? But the reality is that, and it's a sucky reality, but the reality is that so long as we continue to go out and, vote for governments and pay our tax money and all this stuff, those people are going to be there and they're going to want, respect my authority kind of stuff, right? And
Exactly.
it's better for them to come in and say, we're really welcoming of this. We really want this to happen. We want to encourage this in whatever way we can as a government, versus like cracking down on it, especially not in the way that we're seeing being proposed in India, and especially not the way that we've seen in China, which is crazy. And of course, the funny thing about China is that they weren't able to stop it. That this thriving black market now exists in China, where Chinese Bitcoiners are paying a premium so they can get their Bitcoin, which is kind of crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's what's exciting about cryptocurrency. That's what people have been saying from the beginning, because it's not a matter of saying, oh, will the government allow this? Will they not allow this? This is something that exists regardless of what governments say. And I think that is the primary power of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin. We haven't had that before. Before, we've had so many different types of competing currencies in existence. We've had all kinds of digital currencies. We've had things that can do the things that Bitcoin can do, and they're great, and they've just been shut down. They just haven't worked, or they haven't gotten the network effect to be able to keep going, because people are like, well, the government's going to shut this down. I don't want to buy into something that they're just going to make illegal. Suddenly we have something that can't be shut down. And I think that that's the primary power of this. And I mean, this may only ever just apply to a fringe sector of society who are interested in that stuff, but that's still substantial. We saw that Bitcoin works as a currency when it was basically just being used on Silk Road. It worked. People recognized that this had value. They recognized that if they accepted this currency, they could then sell it later because there was enough market demand for it. That's all you need for this to be functional and to be useful for people. And we've already proven that, over and over again. So it doesn't matter to me what governments say at the end of the day. If China says, oh, we ban this, if India says, oh, we ban this, because first of all, I mean, there are competing jurisdictions all over the world. So as long as it's allowed in one country in the world, then this is going to be fine. And even if it's not allowed in any country, let's say they all band together, and I know this is something that Japan is looking at the moment, they all band together and say, let's create this global decision that we'll all get on the same page and we'll treat cryptocurrency exactly the same way, so there are no loopholes. Let's say by some crazy miracle that happens and Russia decides to agree with America and China, and all the countries are just like, oh, we are all on the same page. Cuba's like, I agree with you in the United States. And by some miracle that happens, it doesn't need government permission in order to operate. There are so many ways that this can continue to operate. Like, governments can slow it down. They can, put probes on IP addresses and monitor usage and track things down. But there are so many different ways that people are coming up with alternative internet systems and all of these different ways that this could still continue to thrive. So we have not seen, we've only just seen the beginning of cryptocurrency and what power this could give to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And governments aren't going to be able to stop it. And that's kind of the funny thing, is that you brought up a good point. We are having, we're reimagining the way the internet works, which is a fundamental shift in everything that we've understood about the internet up until this point. And if you go back to when the internet was started, and the people who started the internet, they never wanted it to end up like this necessarily, with all these walled gardens stealing all your data. It's big government's biggest gift ever, the current internet.
Oh my gosh, government couldn't get away with it by passing these things, and so they just go through this private companies. We're like, of my own volition, please have all of this information about myself, and the government says thank you. So we've really done this to ourselves and haven't quite realized the effect that this is going to have in terms of monitoring people, tracking them, curtailing their decisions, and all of that. I think it's something really important that people need to be more cognizant of.
And if you look at these giant private companies, yes, they're private companies, but the level of interoperability, of closeness between these private companies and government organizations is scary on a lot of levels. I think it's is Facebook on the Atlantic Council, which is like funded by the CIA and the Gulf monarchies and stuff like this. And it's some scary stuff when you start to see how in bed with each other they are.
Absolutely. It's I mean I look down on places like Australia that have really destroyed encryption and said, hey, we have the right to access all your devices and to force you and to put backdoors and things and fine you hundreds of millions of dollars if you don't comply, companies. And that for me is crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, we can't be so angry at that happening. Like, I mean, they're very open about it, but then you have the American government that's doing all the same things, but they're just doing it in a more closed off way. Mm-hmm. In part, I kind of prefer the closed off way because at least there's some semblance, like we haven't normalized the idea of government just stealing all of our data. There's still kind of a little bit of pushback. Like they have to hide it because the culture hasn't accepted it yet. I prefer that system to what's happening in Australia where people are like, oh, encryption. I think I heard something about that. Don't really mind. I did not see the pushback.
I trust the government.
I trust the government. They've got my best interests at heart. And, that to me is really sad. And I wish it wasn't like that. And I wonder if people will wake up too late realizing, what they've done. So as long as there's somewhere in the world that still respects these freedoms and can push back against the bullying. I mean, we've seen Ecuador crumble. Before there was sort of this bastion of we're not going to be bullied by the American government. We're going to stand up. And Julian Assange could seek refuge in the middle of Britain, in the middle of London. He could seek refuge. And that was amazing. Then you have this new regime that's like, oh, we don't mind being bullied by the US. Also, thank you, IMF, for that $1 billion loan that you've just given us in exchange for Julian Assange.
That didn't influence our decision at all.
Not at all. So there is, it's a sad state of affairs when you don't have people standing up for what's right. But then again, America is incredibly powerful. And it makes sense that people are buckling under the pressure because it's scary. It's scary.
Absolutely. And I saw something recently, and it's interesting about the ability of cryptocurrencies to actually provide an international level playing field for actors, because I saw recently that the United States is revoking sanction waivers to South Korea, Turkey, Japan, China, and India. Now, China and India don't really care because they're big enough economies. They don't necessarily, especially China, isn't going to be bullied like that by the U.S. But we have to keep it real that South Korea, Turkey, and Japan are much more susceptible to those levers of power. And basically, the U.S. is telling Japan that it's no longer allowed to buy oil from Iran, or that it'll be facing sanctions itself from the U.S. I mean, that's a broken international financial system when you have these countries doing this. And look, I mean, people can fall on all sides of the coin here in terms of the political situation, and there's been a lot of misinformation about that. But my baseline on all these things always comes back to what's providing the most freedom, right? And that's actually decentralization. And all the trouble that decentralization can bring with it. People are going to do bad things, but people are going to do mostly good things.
Absolutely.
When we give them the freedom to do this. And every time we let governments do these kind of things, we're saying, just take away a little bit more of my freedom, a little more of my freedom every single time.
There's this false idea that, you create a law and the bad guys are going to follow it. No, it's the good guys that are getting hurt. It's their prosperity that's being curtailed. It's their innovation that's being hampered. The bad guys are going to go, it's a law. What do I care about laws? I'm a bad guy. I don't listen to the laws. Right. They're going to find a way around it. So, I mean, you're going to have bad things happening regardless of whether there's regulation or not. And I think that regulation for most people is just this crutch. It's this thing that makes them feel good. Oh, we tried. At least we did something. And they're not looking at the actual outcomes of what these policies do. There are lots of unintended consequences, and it really hurts people. But they're unseen consequences, and that's what hurts the most. They're dispersed costs, and whereas the good things about this are really concentrated, you can see the benefits, and it's like, oh, we're going to stop the terrorists, that's in name, that sounds great. And when you put that to the floor of Congress and you say, we're going to stop the terrorists, that sounds great. You give that to the media and you say, we're going to stop the terrorists, oh, everyone cheers, yes, we're going to do something. You look at the outcomes of these things and whether they actually do what they plan, and then all of the people that are being hurt, you don't hear from them. It's all dispersed costs. It's all people just incrementally losing their freedoms. So it's this huge imbalance in what's happening, and it's just creeping towards ever more totalitarian regimes. That's the direction we're going in.
1984 is not an instruction manual.
Oh my gosh!
Actually, the Snowden leaks actually really proved that they had all this incredibly advanced spy stuff, which, that was years ago now, so I can only imagine how much more advanced it is now. But back when that was happening, the official statement was, well, we're doing this to protect against terrorism, all this stuff. But Snowden revealed that what were they actually doing? They were actually spying on activists who were doing things like trying to protect the environment. They were actually, doing corporate espionage for American companies, trying to, get better deals when they're dealing with foreign governments and stuff like this. They're spying on their girlfriends and stuff like this. This is what was happening. This is what mostly that technology is being used for. They were not like terrorists. Who cares about terrorists? We're here to make money. And that's crazy. Now